The late afternoon sun slanted across the quiet suburban street as I pulled into my driveway, the sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires of my black pickup truck. It had been a long day, and all I wanted was to step inside, kick off my boots, and relax. But as soon as I opened the car door, something caught my eye, an obnoxiously bright orange slip of paper flapping against my front door. My first thought was delivery advertisement, maybe a contractor flyer, but no, the bold, block letters screamed, "Violation notice, immediate attention required." My stomach tightened with irritation before I even reached for it. I peeled the paper off the door and scanned it. The notice accused me of improper parking and cited some vague Community Bylaw 14b. It claimed that parking my truck in my own driveway obstructed the neighborhood's aesthetic standards and diminished property values. At the bottom, printed in smug capital letters, was the kicker: failure to correct this violation within 24 hours will result in fines of $250 per day. I actually laughed out loud, though the sound was more bitter than amused. Parking in my driveway was apparently a crime now? Only in a neighborhood ruled by a power-hungry HOA president. As if summoned by my irritation, she appeared. Striding across the street like she owned every square foot of asphalt, there came Mrs. Linda Carlton, the self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, clipboard clutched tight to her chest, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the afternoon glare. She was a short woman, but her posture carried the smug weight of someone convinced of her superiority. "I see you've received your violation notice," she said, her voice nasal, slicing through the calm air. "We can't have residents cluttering up their driveways. It disrupts the uniform look of the neighborhood." I stared at her, holding the paper between my fingers like it was toxic. Cluttering up my driveway? That's where vehicles are supposed to go. It's my property. I kept my tone level, but she smirked as if she had caught me in some scandal. "Our bylaws are very clear," she replied sharply. "Driveways must remain free of parked vehicles except for temporary loading or unloading. Otherwise, it lowers the visual harmony of the community." She tapped her clipboard, as though the act itself carried authority. "I'll have to enforce daily fines if you don't comply." A heat rose in me, but I held my ground. Neighbors were peeking through blinds, some pausing during evening walks to watch the exchange. Everyone knew Linda Carlton loved making scenes. This was her stage, and she relished the attention. Still, I wasn't about to let her stomp all over me. "You're telling me I can't park in my own driveway, on my own property?" I asked, my voice low but edged with disbelief. She nodded firmly, lips pursed, clearly savoring what she thought was another victory. "That's exactly right," she said, and adjusted her sunglasses with a flourish. "Welcome to the community. I suggest you learn the rules quickly." I didn't argue further in that moment, not because she was right, but because I knew better than to show all my cards too soon. I folded the violation notice neatly, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and gave her the kind of calm smile that only unsettled her more. "Don't worry, Mrs. Carlton," I said evenly. "I'll make sure this situation gets handled properly." She mistook my calmness for submission and strutted back across the street, chin tilted high. But inside, I was already thinking ahead. She had no idea who she was trying to fine. The next morning, I stepped outside with a mug of coffee, the air still carrying the chill of dawn. My truck sat exactly where it had the night before, squarely in my driveway, perfectly aligned, not blocking the sidewalk or the street. Yet, like a vulture circling its prey, there came Linda Carlton again. Clipboard in hand, lips already pursed, she marched across the cul-de-sac as though summoned by the simple sight of my vehicle. She didn't even bother with a good morning. "You're still in violation," she declared, her nasal voice cutting through the quiet. A few joggers slowed, curious. She seemed to thrive on having an audience. I took a sip of my coffee, unbothered, and gestured toward the truck. "It's my driveway. Nothing illegal, nothing obstructed." "You're reaching, Linda." Her eyes narrowed behind oversized sunglasses. "It's not about legality. It's about community standards," she snapped, emphasizing the word as though it were sacred scripture. "You agreed to abide by them when you moved in here. The rules clearly state no vehicles parked in driveways overnight." Her voice carried, ensuring the neighbors nearby heard every syllable. A man watering his lawn paused mid-spray, pretending not to listen, while an older couple walking their dog slowed to a crawl. I raised an eyebrow. Community standards, huh? So tell me, who exactly decided that cars can't sit in driveways? Isn't that what driveways are for? My tone was calm, but the challenge in my words hit her like a slap. She stiffened, her posture straightening as she flipped through her clipboard papers theatrically. The board voted. I enforce. That's how this works. Your personal opinions are irrelevant when the greater good of the neighborhood is at stake. She jabbed her pen toward me like she was punctuating each word. You either comply, or you'll face compounding fines. And if necessary, we'll escalate to towing. That struck a nerve, not because I was afraid of her threat, but because the arrogance dripped from every syllable. Towing my truck, from my own driveway? The absurdity of it nearly made me laugh. Instead, I leaned against the hood of the pickup, taking another sip of coffee, deliberately casual. You're telling me you'd tow my truck from property I own, on land I pay taxes for? My voice stayed even, but the neighbors listening could hear the steel in it. A ripple went through the small audience. Someone muttered, "That can't be right." Linda heard it too, and her cheeks flushed crimson under the morning sun. "You don't seem to understand," she hissed, lowering her voice now, as though embarrassed by the murmurs of doubt spreading among the onlookers. "The HOA has authority. I have authority. This community would fall apart without rules, without structure. People like you, newcomers, think you can just ignore the bylaws. But let me make it clear, you will comply, whether you like it or not." Her words quivered with a mixture of fury and self-importance, but what struck me most was the way she clung to that clipboard as if it were a shield. She needed it, needed the paper and ink to back her up, because without them, she was just a neighbor with too much time on her hands. I let her rant finish, then smiled faintly, folding my arms across my chest. "You're right about one thing, Linda," I said, my voice carrying loud enough for every watching ear. "This community does need structure. It needs honesty, too. And maybe it's time someone reminded the board that rules don't outweigh ownership rights." A flicker of unease crossed her face, quickly masked with bluster. "We'll see about that," she snapped. "I'll file another report today. Expect a formal fine notice in your mailbox by tomorrow morning." She spun on her heel, storming back to her house, every step sharp and dramatic. The neighbors began to disperse, whispering among themselves. I could feel their curiosity, their growing doubt about the president they'd tolerated for too long. Some smiled faintly at me, subtle nods of support. I finished my coffee, savoring the taste of the coming storm. Let Linda escalate. Let her file her reports and plaster my mailbox with fines. She had no idea whose driveway she was picking a fight with, or the authority I carried in my back pocket. The argument had escalated, but the game was only just beginning. By the end of the week, my mailbox was stuffed with a manila envelope stamped with the HOA's logo, thick, overstuffed, and smelling faintly of toner. I carried it inside like one might carry a stack of overdue bills, set it down on the kitchen counter, and slit it open with the edge of my pocket knife. Out spilled letter after letter, each one more ridiculous than the last. Notice of fine. Notice of second violation. Final warning. They claimed my non-compliance had already accrued $1,250 in penalties, with daily fines to continue until my truck was permanently removed from the driveway. The language was legalistic, dripping with authority, but hollow at its core. They were swinging paper swords at someone holding steel. I sat at the table, reading every line carefully, though I already knew my position. They threatened liens, threatened towing, even hinted at further legal escalation. Each page bore the signature of none other than Linda Carlton, HOA president, scrawled in the same looping script. I could almost hear her smug satisfaction as she signed them, convinced I'd cave under the weight of her bureaucratic avalanche. But what she didn't know was that this wasn't my first rodeo. I'd dealt with HOAs before. More importantly, I'd learned long ago that paperwork cuts both ways. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the neighborhood in shades of amber, I pulled out my own set of documents, the thick black binder that rarely left the locked cabinet in my study. Inside were copies of deeds, contracts, and land agreements. Linda might have thought she was dealing with just another homeowner, another easy mark to bully into compliance. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't just the man who parked his truck in the driveway. I was the landlord of this entire development. The HOA, in its eagerness to act like an empire, had forgotten it was built on ground they didn't own. My ground. Still, I wasn't going to reveal my hand too early. Power is best wielded at the right moment, and Linda was still parading around with her clipboard, flaunting her authority in front of neighbors. If I stopped her now, she'd try to spin it. No, I needed her to dig deeper, to overplay her role in front of everyone. That's when exposure would sting the most. So instead of calling her, I called someone else, my lawyer, an old friend who had helped draft the very lease agreements the HOA relied on. We laughed about the absurdity of the letters, though he quickly shifted into professional mode, preparing a set of counters just in case they escalated to court. Let them hang themselves, he advised. By the time we're done, she'll wish she never printed that first notice. The next day, Linda didn't waste time. She stormed up my walkway with a smug grin plastered across her face, a certified letter in her hand. Final demand, she announced, her voice syrupy with false politeness. Neighbors again lingered at the edges of their yards, pretending to water plants or sweep porches, but I could feel their eyes on us. She handed me the envelope like it was a grenade, and she was proud to pull the pin. I took it with a smile, thanked her, and said, "Don't worry, Linda. I'm already handling this." Her brow furrowed, suspicion flickering, but she covered it with a tight-lipped smile. "See that you do," she said sharply, before turning on her heel. As she walked away, I leaned against the doorframe and looked out at the cul-de-sac. The whispers were getting louder among the neighbors. Some of them had their own grievances with Linda, stories of nitpicky fines, of lawn length measurements, of letters scolding them for hanging the wrong kind of wreaths during holidays. They were watching closely, hoping someone would finally stand up to her. What they didn't know yet was that I wasn't just standing up. I was about to pull the rug out from under her throne. The HOA meeting that month was held in the community clubhouse, a squat brick building with beige walls and folding chairs arranged in rows. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, washing the room in a sterile glow. I arrived deliberately on time, binder in hand, while most of the board members and a smattering of residents had already gathered. At the front of the room, sitting taller than everyone else in a high-backed chair, was Linda Carlton. Her clipboard rested on the table like a crown jewel, and she wore the smug expression of a monarch about to deliver a decree. She spotted me immediately, her lips twitching upward in a smile that screamed, "I've got you now." As the meeting was called to order, she wasted no time. "Next item of business," Linda announced, tapping her pen against the clipboard like a gavel. "We have a matter of repeated violations at 42 Ridgeway Lane." She tilted her head toward me with theatrical disdain. "This resident has refused to comply with multiple warnings regarding improper parking, and fines have accumulated to a total of $2,750 as of today. If further action is not taken, the board will be forced to place a lien against the property." A few gasps rose from the audience. Some neighbors leaned forward, whispering, while others glanced my way with sympathy. Linda's voice sharpened as she looked directly at me. "Would you care to explain your non-compliance, sir?" I stood slowly, letting the silence hang for just a moment before I spoke. "Yes, I would," I said, my voice calm but carrying enough weight to draw every eye. I held up the thick black binder and placed it on the table in front of me. "You've been sending me notices, fines, and threats, claiming authority over how I use my own driveway. You've cited bylaws, waived paperwork, and paraded your clipboard around this neighborhood like it's law." My words cut through the room, and Linda's smile faltered, though she quickly tried to regain her composure. "And rightly so," she interjected, her tone dismissive. "These rules exist for the betterment of the community." I didn't look at her. Instead, I opened the binder, flipping deliberately to the signed deed. "What you failed to understand, Mrs. Carlton, is that this land, the ground beneath every house in this neighborhood, does not belong to the HOA. It belongs to me." A murmur rippled through the room, louder this time, and I heard someone whisper, "Wait, what did he say?" I continued, my tone steady. "The HOA leases the rights to operate here under agreements made years ago. And those agreements stipulate that as the landlord, I hold ultimate authority over the land and any structures built upon it. Which means your fines, your threats, and your so-called liens." I tapped the binder for emphasis. "They're meaningless." Linda's face drained of color, but she tried to laugh it off, though the sound was strained. That's absurd. The HOA, she began, but I cut her off, sliding copies of the documents across the table toward the other board members. Don't take my word for it. Read the contracts your own organization signed. Every clause is there in black and white. The HOA governs community guidelines, sure, but only within the boundaries of the lease. And those boundaries don't override ownership rights. Board members leaned over the papers, eyes scanning, brows furrowing deeper with every page. The silence stretched, heavy, until one finally looked up and said, "He's right. It's all here." The room erupted. Neighbors whispered fiercely among themselves, some outright laughing at the revelation. One man in the back clapped once, loud and sharp, before stopping as though testing the waters. But it was enough. The dam had broken. Conversations rose into a hum of disbelief and satisfaction. Meanwhile, Linda sat frozen, her knuckles white as she clutched her clipboard like a life raft. Her authority, built on fear and bluster, was crumbling before her very eyes. I leaned forward slightly, my voice low but firm enough for everyone to hear. "So, Mrs. Carlton, before you send me another violation notice, perhaps you should check who actually owns the driveway you're trying to police." Her lips opened and closed like she wanted to argue, but no words came. She looked to the board for backup, but they avoided her gaze, suddenly more interested in the documents than her theatrics. The weight of the moment pressed in, the audience murmuring, the board shifting uncomfortably, the truth sitting heavy in the fluorescent-lit air. I gathered my binder, gave the room a polite nod, and returned to my seat. For the first time since I'd moved in, Linda Carlton had nothing to say. And that silence was louder than any fine she had ever written. The days following the HOA meeting carried a different rhythm in the neighborhood. Where once there had been stiff nods and careful distance, now there were waves, conversations, even laughter. It seemed the entire community had collectively exhaled after years of being suffocated by Linda Carlton's grip. My driveway, once the stage for her endless theatrics, now stood as a quiet monument of defiance. My truck sat there proudly every night, a silent reminder that her clipboard and her threats had no power here. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now stopped by, offering stories of their own battles with the HOA. The petty fines, the constant harassment, the feeling of living under a microscope. Each one carried the same note of relief. It was finally over. Linda herself was rarely seen in those first few days. Gone were her daily patrols with the clipboard. Gone were the self-satisfied lectures shouted from across the street. Word spread quickly that she had been called into a closed-door board session the very next evening after the meeting. By the end of it, she was stripped of her position as president. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had tried to lord power over everyone else had been undone not by rebellion, but by her own ignorance. A few of the board members quietly apologized when they saw me, admitting they'd only gone along with her antics out of fear of confrontation. It didn't surprise me. Bullies always thrive on silence until someone finally shatters it. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the cul-de-sac in shades of orange and purple, I stepped outside to find Linda on my walkway. She no longer carried her clipboard. Her posture was slouched, her oversized sunglasses replaced by tired eyes that avoided mine. Without a word, she reached into her purse and pulled out the very first violation notice she had taped to my door. For a moment she stared at it, her lips trembling as though she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Then, with a shaking hand, she tore it in half and dropped the pieces into my trash bin. No dramatic speech, no false bravado, just quiet humiliation. She turned without meeting my gaze and shuffled back to her house, her reign of intimidation officially over. The community shifted after that. The board, now led by a softer-spoken man named Greg, promised to focus on actual neighborhood improvements instead of petty power plays. People began hosting block parties again, kids rode their bikes freely without fear of some citation about noise ordinances, and the air itself seemed lighter. Neighbors thanked me not with grand gestures, but with small kindnesses. A pie left at my doorstep, a wave when I mowed the lawn, an extra hand when I was hauling in lumber for a project. It wasn't about being a hero, it was about restoring balance. They finally realized that the HOA existed to serve the community, not control it. As for me, I went back to my routine, though I carried a new satisfaction with each passing day. The binder with the property deeds was returned to its cabinet, its job done for now, but I knew it was ready should anyone ever forget again who really owned the ground beneath their feet. My truck remained parked exactly where it belonged, a symbol of quiet defiance turned victory. And every time I stepped outside and saw it sitting there, bathed in the soft glow of the porch light, I couldn't help but smile. Linda Carlton had tried to fine me for parking in my own driveway, but in the end, it wasn't me who paid the price.